circumstances and I've done well. I don't need the corrupt money or any of the nonsense that comes along with the power. All I want to do is create a better world for my child and for future generations of Americans. And we need people who are above this, the petty self-interest to step up and do the right thing right now. I hope to lead by example.
The State of the Union saw a public glimpse of a different Obama adopting a policy of bipartisanship and reaching out to Republicans. And this is a subject which is starting to sort of get a bit more interest now. The day after the State of the Union, Obama appeared at the Republican congressional retreat in Maryland and he took question and answers. During the event, he brought in the cameras and changed the focus, and that changed the agenda. And during the pre-game show of the Super Bowl, during his Katie Couric interview, he said he was going to invite Republicans for a televised healthcare forum on February 25th. Do you think that the Republican leadership should take the Obama bait in this debate? Or really, it's going to be a debate. It's not really a forum. It's a debate.
Well, I'm not all that interested really in the whole left-right paradigm, fight, because it's really not going to solve the problem. One of the things that I felt two things watching Barack Obama's State of the Union address is one, that the guy is sort of, in a short year, has drifted into self-parody. I mean, he stood up there, and it sounded to me like he was trying to convince himself of the things that he was actually saying. And the second thing was that the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the debt and the amount of spending that's happened, not just on our backs, but on future generations of Americans. If you add up all of the current federal debt, if you add up the unfunded liabilities, if you add up all the backstopping to the banks and the GSEs, the federal government has put $100 trillion worth of debt on top of our shoulders. That's $330,000 a head for every person in America. I mean, it's a debt that we can never repay. Both Republicans and Democrats were responsible for that. So as much as that's all interesting in whether or not the Republican leadership is going to take the bait, it really sort of sidesteps the fundamental problem which is happening in D.C., and that is that everyone ignores the Constitution. They don't pay, not only don't pay it any respect whatsoever. We now have, instead of a limited republic, we have an unlimited government based on whatever Nancy Pelosi can get away with. It has to change, and part of what has to change is this whole acceptance of the left-right battle, because it really misses the point.
Well, just continuing on about perhaps the lost circumstance for Obama, which was focusing on healthcare and not on what he needed to really do. Barack Obama has continued to maintain, especially during the State of the Union, that the interventionist approach of their stimulus package worked. As an entrepreneur in the private sector, did you notice the stimulus making an impact?
No, I mean, and not only that, but the people in Washington want to be our saviors. It's a good business to be in. They've got the people convinced that the state is, and by the state I mean the federal government, is some sort of god that can multiply the loaves and the fishes. It doesn't work that way. All they can do is just take from one group and give to another with political interest attached. The real productive economy is the private economy. It's sustainable economy. What we have now is unsustainable. And so, no, personally I haven't. I don't expect that we will have any sustainable recovery built based on that. And what we ought to do is follow the blueprint that's been laid in the past and actually start cutting government. I think what everyone ought to think about is, imagine today, tomorrow morning you wake up, you read in the paper that the leader of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and the President have all agreed that they're going to cut government spending by 50%. They're going to cut capital gains taxes permanently, and they're going to cut income taxes by 1/3. How would the stock market react to that? And the stock market is a future barometer of what business activity is going to be. What do you think the job market would turn into in a relatively short time? And I ask these questions because I want people to think about the real question, which is, why aren't we doing that? And that's the ideology that Barack Obama and the rest of Washington, D.C. has to absorb. They've got to internalize. They've got to understand that they're just making a mess of things.
Let's go over some of the statements you've placed on your website, because you've got a number of platforms which you've made statements on, but there's one I'd like to sort of go over first, and that's on the topic of energy independence, where you say, quote, "The quest for energy independence is also a form of protectionism. Often overlooked in the discussion of energy independence is the question, why? Why can we not trade for energy just like we trade for other products, services and commodities in the global market?" Aside from environmental considerations, a common answer is that why are we buying from countries that don't like us very much? Again, another question, why don't they like us very much? And one more question, if they did like us, would we need energy independence, unquote, John, I'm thinking here you've opened up a real Pandora's box of a topic because it really moves beyond the happy driving, hybrid, holding each other's hands and singing Kumbaya. The right does have a united front and agreement on energy independence with the left, but their motivation is to stop trading with our enemies. Where do you think this next step in the debate is going to be?
Well, I'm just one voice out there. I'd like to challenge people to consider their assumptions. I mean, we're constantly bombarded with this idea of we need independence from foreign oil. I mean, I can remember Jimmy Carter talking about it. It's 35 years ago. Yeah, I mean, this has been going on for a long time. And yet we have this global marketplace. And why can't we get our energy needs from the sources from which we need them? And it creates a whole foreign policy problem. Where is this debate going? I don't know. I mean, I think the quest for a domestic source of energy is going to be an excuse for a lot more government intervention in that market, and you're going to see lots of government money wasted and given to the friends of people in power for the quest for this independence, and I think we have to challenge that quest in the first place.
I'm curious in knowing this, John, because you're running in San Francisco, an electorate that hedges a lot of interest on green energy, did that influence you in having to present an energy independence platform on your campaign?
No, San Francisco, I don't think it would matter what part of the country I lived in. I would present the same issue because it's a national matter. So, no, I don't think being in San Francisco had any impact on that.
I had the good fortune to speak to Senate candidate Chuck DeVore in an early edition of Solid Principles, and he made the comment that California seems to force green energy only coming from wind and solar, and by doing so it places us on track to repeat the folly of Spain's experience with green energy. Do you share that sentiment towards California's obsession for green energy? Do you think it's heading on that pathway?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start off by addressing that question by saying that I think everyone, at least most reasonable people, share the same goals. We want to leave the earth in a better place than we found it. We want to live in a clean environment. We want our children and our families to live in a clean environment. The question is, what's the best way to achieve that end? And I think that the answer so often for governments is to use it as an excuse to control more resources. But if you look at the history of governments achieving anything relative to any environmental objectives, they're not impressive achievements. And in the meantime, we're wasting valuable resources trying to achieve something that's most likely going to be achieved by the private sector anyway. So, again, I just find this to be a hot-button item that people who are in power are trying to use to have resources diverted in their direction.
Well, now on to healthcare. You state on your website, quote, currently about 60 cents of every healthcare dollar goes through the government. If you think healthcare is expensive, when the government is involved, 60 cents on the dollar, wait until it's 100 cents on the dollar, unquote. Now, may I ask, if you become Congressman Dennis, would you vote for healthcare reform in its current form introduced by the Democratic caucus?
No.
Why so?
Well, personal experience again. I mean, when I was a kid growing up in the projects, I remember doctors making house calls. There were services available even to people with the least economic power in those days. And then also during those days, the government was involved in healthcare maybe 1 cent on the dollar or something like that, some very low amount. Today, as you mentioned, we're at 60 cents on the dollar, and during the years, costs have gone up. And there, I believe, is a correlation between the more government intervention in that market, the more expensive healthcare has become. So my solutions are more free market oriented. Let's get the government out of the healthcare business as quickly and as painlessly as possible, and let the market provide the services that people demand.
Well, on the subject of debt, budget and taxes, you have an article which you have in your campaign site. You propose 7 steps the federal government should undertake, and some of those include close all military bases outside the United States that are not constitutional, that we cannot afford them. You also say about selling all vital assets, including land and the bases, and all proceeds be earmarked for debt reduction. Just going over the list, some people within the Republican side would point out that doesn't sound like a lot of previous platforms for the GOP. How would you react to that allegation?
It depends on how far back you go. Robert Taft, who was known as Mr. Republican, there are statues of him as Mr. Republican in Washington, D.C., didn't even want us to be part of NATO. If you go back to the pre-Buckley era in the Republican Party, there was a really robust non-interventionist position, and that was the de facto foreign policy position. It's only been in the Buckley years that that's changed.